But let's start with the first conversation. It has to do with inflation, like I said, and let me introduce my guest today. We've got Kiran Telang, who is a certified financial planner and an author of at least a couple of books that I know of. Thank you so much, Kiran, for taking the time. And I want to ask, now often when choosing investment products, people tend to focus on the returns, but they don't necessarily pay enough attention to the real return. Why is it so important to pay attention to the real return? And for people who are not aware of what is a real return?
First of all, a very happy Dhanteras to all the viewers. So actually, when we talk about returns, we tend to forget that there are hidden factors in returns. So real return is something which takes care of inflation. And the return that you get after counting in inflation is the real return. So why this becomes important is because the real return is what actually makes your money keep its purchasing power. So let's say, for example, something costs rupees 100 today, and a year down the line, because of inflation of say 5%, it will grow. The cost will go up to 105 rupees. So that 105 rupees is what you need to have next year to buy the same thing. Now, if you invest in a product which does not give you more than 5%, you will fall short of money to buy that product. So that is why real return becomes very important. Otherwise, you will actually be losing money in the long run.
Right, absolutely. And that's not even counting the cost of certain products or investments and the tax impact of those investments. So we'll talk about that in just a short while. But I also want to talk about inflation. Do you think in the interactions that you have from your knowledge of how people operate and do their finances, do people focus enough, do you think, on inflation, Kiran?
See, inflation is something that people know as a concept, but when it actually comes to application, it is a little tricky because the calculation on inflation becomes a little difficult. So, say if you're, planning for a long-term goal, so your kid is say 2 years old and you're planning for the higher education of your kid, you're talking of a term of maybe 15 years plus. So to build in inflation for that period and to include, taxation and other factors, it becomes a little complicated to actually arrive at, what will be the cost that will be required at that point in time when your kid is going for higher education. So while conceptually people would be aware that inflation is there, in practical application there is a lacuna, and that is the reason sometimes people don't realize that the investments that they are going for might actually not be suitable to the long-term goals that they are planning for. I mean, they might fall short because the real return on those investments is not matching up to their requirements.
Okay. Now, the usual case, and when people speak about mehengai or when they speak about inflation, you would speak about things that you consume on a daily basis. This is something that I think is the most common usage of the term, right? If you talk about what is happening at the bhaji mandi, what you're seeing in terms of the value of tomatoes or onions. But it's so much more than that, right, Kiran? It's to do with every aspect of your life. So how does one approach the concept of inflation? And would you say that it's justified in being called the silent killer?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, the application of the concept is something that people are not able to grasp. So, like you said, the daily utility value is where you actually realize that there is mehengai or so-called inflation. But if you're talking of bigger things, so like I spoke about education goals. So education inflation could be much higher than what your regular vegetable inflation is. I mean, your food products inflation could be in the range of 5 to 6%, whereas the education inflation could be much higher. Similar case with medical expenses. So to just get a brief idea of how actually things work, if you look at your kids' school fee year on year, you will figure out that that is the amount, the inflation is built into that. So if you see what I have seen so far is that it's a 10% plus, depending on which board and what kind of education the kid is going for. Likewise, in medical expenses, I mean, the apart from inflation, I mean, there are other factors too. But if you see the cost of treatment in hospitals, or if you even take, example of your insurance policies, your health insurance covers, the inflation there is much higher. So when you actually group things in various heads, say maybe a regular domestic expense vis-a-vis education or healthcare or maybe holidays. So each of these heads could have different inflations. And added to that, there will be something known as personal inflation. So your lifestyle also goes up, so that adds up to inflation. So what kind of lifestyle you're living at the beginning of your career, you might have a higher lifestyle few years down the line. So that also adds up. And you don't realize that that is actually, eating away into the corpus of wealth that you're building. So you need to take care that the returns on your corpus, the investments, have to be higher than inflation in all these factors.
So how does one go about doing this? Kiran? Because you're talking about the importance of inflation in your goal setting process, because you obviously have to set goals, you obviously have to set your targets in terms of how much you need. You need to factor in a certain amount of return, which is where real returns come into play. What should one's approach be without getting too technical?
Okay, so in simple terms, let me take two examples, one of education and one of retirement, because these are the largest and the longest duration goals that normally families have. So inflation is a very finite goal, so at a certain date that goal will be met, and then you're done with it. So if you're taking inflation, say the cost of sending your kid to a particular college that you're looking at is maybe 20 lakhs today, and your child is going to go to that college in 10 years time. So build in inflation for 10 years at a higher rate, maybe a 10%. So what will be the cost of education at that point in time for that particular college? So that should be your target for this particular goal. Now, when we come to retirement, it becomes a little tricky because retirement is not a particular date goal. It's not finite. It is a lifetime goal. So while you are earning, there will be inflation, and there'll be a certain date when you will retire. So basically, your income from your salary or your profession will stop, and you will need to draw money from the corpus that you have accumulated. But even when you're drawing money from your investments, inflation is still existing, right? Inflation doesn't go away. So you're talking about a lifetime of inflation. So you need to be aware that even in the corpus, when you are, calculating withdrawal, the inflation should also be taken in at that point in time. So it's a two-step process. So one, inflation in the accumulation phase, and second, inflation in the distribution phase when you're actually drawing from your investments. So cumulatively looked this way, you can actually realistically arrive at a figure of corpus required for retirement, and that will be where you will be dipping into after you retire, and you will generate a stream of income from that corpus.
So an added point to this would be the cost factor, right, where taxes come into the play, because like I said, when you focus on real return, you have to ensure that your real return is a certain amount so that you can meet your goals. At the same time, if the tax eats away into a portion of your return, your real return might actually come in less than you had initially anticipated. So is it very important to add the two, to also factor in tax when you're planning your financial goal?
Right. So, see, let me bring in a factor. So, not only cost, but also the fee portion, So, for all services that you take for investments, there is a certain fee that you pay to various investment advisors, or even for your mutual fund investments. So, there are different kind of fees. So, that also impacts. So, overall, whatever is the cost for you to make money on your investments has to be reduced from the actual return. So, that is something that we need to take care of. Now, unfortunately, what happens is in case of taxes, the tax slabs keep changing, tax rules keep changing. So it is very difficult to predict it for a very long period of time. So you need to, build the portfolio in such a way that it is very tax efficient. So you can't really have just, tax saving products, but on an overall basis, see to it that you either defer your tax, or in some manner, if, a particular method of investing is better for you in terms of taxation, choose the method which makes you pay less tax. So overall, inflation, taxes, your fees, everything is eating away into your corpus. But most of these things, I mean, you can't really do anything about, except for, as I said, efficient management of the money, of the investment choices, And in case of fee, I mean, be reasonable in what you pay. I mean, you will not get anything free, but it has to be a reasonable fee. And you really can't do anything about inflation because it is totally beyond your control. So only smart management, try to have more surplus. So save more and invest that money wisely. That is how you will eventually be able to take care of the goal requirements that you have over a long period of time.
And I think it's also important, Kiran, to remember that small trickles end up having a very large effect. So saving early and saving on a regular basis is something that will take care of the problem of inflation. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you as always, Kiran. Happy Dhanteras to you and your family, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure.